Oi, oi, it's your boy, the Kevin Nash of sifting through Apex trash, Jack Slack. It's the Jack Slack podcast, and we're coming at you on Monday, the 11th of December, following an Apex card that was just so Apex. And this was the one that was supposed to be in Shanghai. And they said, no, the people of Shanghai aren't ready to pay for Chris Gutierrez in the main event. So they moved it to the Apex, and boy, did it feel Apex. But it probably worked out more expensive than the standard Apex cards because they had to fly the Asian fighters over. So a small moral victory for those of us who hate the Apex. But there were elements of the Apex that made this fight, or this card, but this fight in particular, very funny. We'll jump straight into it because, why bury the lead? If you're here, you're working hard at being an MMA fan. You're busting your ass being an MMA fan if you're here to listen to me talk about a card that had almost nothing on it. Song Yadong versus Gutierrez Chris. Chris Gutierrez, even when he was undefeated, was not the, I was about to say Apex fighter in terms of excitement. I meant like top level fighter in terms of excitement, like Apex Predator. He is sort of Apex level of excitement in terms of UFC Apex. He's a boring fighter a lot of the time. He throws a lot of low kicks. He throws a lot of hard low kicks when he can. And that is cool if you like low kicks, and certainly something that Joe Rogan likes to go, oh, about. That was a bit Joan Rivers more than Joe Rogan, actually. But he has these fights where he gets the read on someone, he's in control, and then he's nowhere near finishing them. And he's not going to push any kind of, he's not going to push his advantages. He's not going to take any risks. And that was really interesting in this matchup against Song Yadong, because Song Yadong, some of his flaws in recent years have been, or actually always, have been sort of footwork and ring craft. And his answers to low kicks have often been just to try and step up and blast the guy with a counter, which has always been the MMA attitude to low kicks, but he's very, very fast and very, very powerful for a bantamweight. He's also just an absolute machine. He's a Terminator. He can take tons of damage. Corey Sandhagen made the very intelligent decision to focus on smashing him with elbows as he stepped in, because I imagine he was hurting his hands on this dude's face. He does not wobble easily. But Gutierrez, we talked about this on the Boycast. One of the interesting things he does is he picks up his rear leg and does a little teep with his foot pointing out at the 45-degree angle. So it's almost, you could call it an oblique kick, but a lot of the time he's pressing with his with the ball of his foot on the thigh. He just does that to people's lead legs. He does a very gentle, delicate pushing teep into their quad or knee as they walk forward. And then he takes a step out to the side or a step back, and then he does it again, and then he does it again. And if they just keep planting their weight on that foot, trying to keep it braced for if he stomps on their leg, he throws a big hard low kick, whether it's calf or thigh. And when I say big hard low kick, I mean a round kick to the leg. So it's gentle straight kicks to set up a big round kick. And in this fight, Song Yadong was doing a pretty good job of taking his lead leg away whenever Gutierrez looked for a real kick. And he basically never got past that pawing with his rear leg phase. And God knows he wasn't going to throw in combination. He occasionally looked for a spin, but he didn't feel comfortable doing it until round 5. So what he did was he kept feinting spins by doing that little turn so your body's bladed, which can work in really cool ways. Andy Hoog used to fake the spin and then come back with a axe kick the other way, or a round kick the other way, or a left straight. He was a southpaw. There's a great clip of Conor McGregor sparring with someone where they start circling to his right, past his lead foot. He fakes the spin, and as they change direction, he throws a left hand, the big left hand. No man alive can take that left hand, except that old dude in a pub. But yeah, Gutierrez kept faking that spin and then not going for it. The moments of success he had were round 2, he came out and he picked up his rear leg to keep poking the lead knee and thigh with his teep, oblique kick, whatever you want to call it. And from that chamber, he just did a push kick straight into Song Yadong's eye, and it immediately swelled up, snapped his head back. It was a very cool kick, and that was his big moment in round 2. And then he just kept looking for that over and over again because he'd had success with it, and he was like, still don't want to try round kicks, still don't want to do what, my damaging kicks. I'll try and take his head off with a front kick to the face occasionally. And he was using the old kicks and frames that we often talk about. I said, I've said many times before, well, firstly, boxing isn't just your hands. There used to be this thing, people go, who's the best boxer in MMA and why is it Nick Diaz? And I'd go, Nick Diaz's footwork is terrible. There's a little bit more to boxing than just throwing your hands. And any person that you put forward for like best boxer in MMA, they're going to be good at some aspects of boxing and not so good at other aspects of boxing. Junior Dos Santos, lovely jab, lovely body jab, lovely overhand right, lovely right straight. Went straight back on a line, into the fence immediately whenever you put him under pressure. But you can use the footwork of boxing and just use your hands as frames to outmaneuver people and set up your kicks and stay safe without ever having to really punch much. So Chris Gutierrez was working that sort of strategy. And then when he did punch in round 2, he just jabbed both eyes at once, splayed his fingers out like Bruce Lee doing his flicking finger jab, and stabbed them into Song Yadong's eyes, which set up a hilarious sequence in round 3, I think it was, where Gutierrez got poked in the eye, because this is MMA and we're constantly poking each other in the eye. And because it's the Apex, everyone could hear one of Yadong's cornermen, one of the bros at Alpha Male, go, how do you like that? And Chris Gutierrez goes, fuck you, how about you get in here? And the guy was like, no. But yeah, he got really, that I don't think that was the moment that Chris Gutierrez lost. I think he mentally was taken apart throughout this fight, but there were a lot of moments where you could tell he really didn't like how it was going, and he really didn't have what it took to change it, when he was complaining to the ref constantly about being fouled while also committing tons of fouls. He was talking to his corner and they were like, I need you to focus, shut up about that, focus. It seemed like he had 10 people in his corner as well. He had 3 guys in there and then Jonathan Martinez and someone else on the outside. But the Team Alpha Male, I mean, they don't mind a bit of cheating. They are a very cheaty camp. I mean, firstly, even if multiple members of Team Alpha Male hadn't been caught using steroids, you could also just look at them. But they love a bit of eye poking. They love a bit of fence grabbing. Chad Mendes was a world-class cheater. I remember writing that in Notorious, The Life and Fight of Conor McGregor, and then the editor being like, we could get into legal trouble over this. And I sent him like 10 clips of Chad Mendes cheating in MMA, cheating in his wrestling career, trying to break a dude's ankle in like an Achilles lock, and then a load of articles when he popped for performance-enhancing drugs. But we still couldn't call him a cheater, which was a shame. But that was to do with the McGregor fight where he puts his fingers in McGregor's face and starts trying to rip open the cut. Not that I even judge being a cheater, because obviously Conor McGregor was a massive cheater as well. If you get to this level of competition, you are probably so competitive that you don't mind a bit of cheating. So anytime a fighter gets on their high horse about drugs or eye pokes or whatever, it's always a weird thing, because you're like, I feel like you would do the same. The most hilarious one was Jake Shields, before he did his pivot to being an ultra-conservative reply guy. He tried being the guy who got eye poked. He was doing it against Huzamar Palhares. He got a fight against Huzamar Palhares, and he was like trying to paint Palhares as dirty because he holds submissions too long and so on. And then he got eye poked by Palhares, and he was like, "Oh my god, I can't believe someone would eye poke in a professional fight." It's like, bro, your entire title fight against Georges St-Pierre, if you haven't seen it, it's hilarious. Obviously, he can't keep up with Georges St-Pierre on the feet. He can't jab with Georges St-Pierre. What he starts doing is that every time Georges St-Pierre jabs, he throws his hand out as if to jab, leaves it there on GSP's face, has a feel around, and pokes his thumb into GSP's eye. And he eye gouges him about 10 times in that fight, or pokes, accidentally pokes. And then years later, he tried to reinvent himself as the face of good sportsmanship. And Palhares tore his shoulder off, but yeah, Team Alpha Male complaining about anyone cheating is hilarious. And they didn't complain. They were just like, how do you like it? Song Yadong's... I thought he was going to have trouble with the low kicks, but to be fair, the real low kicking never started. But it was because of the thing that I said, Song Yadong only really does this against low kicks, and I don't know if that'll work against someone who's really good at consistently, making distance, circling out and low kicking. And that was jumping in with the left hook as a counter. And he did really well with it. It was enough to put Gutierrez off. He didn't really hit him an awful lot with the left hook. But yeah, it kept Gutierrez scared. And he was doing a decent job of pulling his leg out of the way. And he was doing a decent job of keeping distance. And also, he was doing a good job of throwing his own low kicks, landing his own low kicks. I always have this moan about people being like, oh, you can't low kick with a great low kicker. You'll get low kicked. And it doesn't always work like that. If you low kick with a dude, he has to use his legs to either pull them out of the way to defend himself or pick them up to check to defend himself. and it takes him out of position for low kicking. So it can be very useful. Song Yadong was low kicking lots in this one. There were some cool ones where he threw the right low kick at the lead leg, missed and went into a spin. Anytime he misses, he goes into a spin. That's very Sanshao. He's more wrestle banger nowadays than Sanshao guy, but I believe he came up through Sanshao. There were a couple of Sanshao looks in this fight. The cool kick catch to dump later on, and the spins all the time was another one. The ring craft was an issue still. I think I said in my preview that I think that cage cutting has been a sort of shortfall for Song Yadong. Referenced the Ricky Simone fight, which I just rewatched. The 5 rounds of going after. I mean, they do tear it up, and Yadong is on the front foot most of the time, but it seemed like it almost never hit the fence, and then when it did, Simone would just circle off and was let off the hook. And I don't know if it's necessarily bad. Well, this is the thing. He gets people to the fence, but it takes a long time for him to do, and then he lets them off the fence almost immediately. He doesn't ever keep the pressure on, which as a strong wrestler you'd think he could, but that was the case in this one. Like, he leaps in along the fence, throws maybe a right hand to the body and a left hook upstairs, and then as soon as Gutierrez starts circling towards that left hook, and the left hook falls short, Gutierrez is out the side door and gone. But there were a couple of really cool moments in this fight where he got him to the fence, because obviously that's where Gutierrez had trouble with Pedro Munoz. He's constantly doing this balancing act where he's trying to stand on one leg and kick, and also keep the distance. So he's got to keep moving back and off to the side, and he can get bum rushed onto the fence. There was a really nice one where Song Yadong picked up a single leg, ran. Basically, every time Song Yadong picked up a single leg in this fight, it was money. I'm always, we talk about the inside reach a lot because Clay Guida did it the other week, and I was talking about Mackenzie Dern doing it against Jessica Andrade. But the inside reach is, instead of reaching to the leg in front of you, so your right hand to their left leg, you reach your right hand to their right leg. So you reach for the inside of the knee and thigh. That's the inside reach. Very easy to find in a Southpaw versus Orthodox matchup, and these guys were switching throughout. But Yadong would pick up a single and just run him towards the fence, which is always a great way to start, and that's a way that a lot of guys get into the upper body clinch. They'll run them to the fence with a single, smush them to the fence, or they'll bounce them off the fence so that there's enough room between their back and the cage, the opponent's back and the cage, that they can lock their hands. But the first time he did it, he ran him towards the fence and then pulled him back and changed directions, took his head outside and ran the pipe, which is not a super successful finish in either wrestling or MMA, to be honest, unless you chain it with other things and combine it. So his change of direction there was really good. And then there was a really nice example later on where he grabbed the single, ran to the fence, and then freed his hands and hit the body in the head. And I was like, that's perfect. Keep doing that. More of that, please. If Song Yadong did that in every round, that'd be great. And picking up singles, I mean, it is effort. I do understand why he doesn't do it constantly. But if he'd done it a few times, it would have been very successful for him. When they hit the mat, it was, Song Yadong could get some punches off, and Chris Gutierrez couldn't do anything really except try and throw the triangle up straight overhead, which almost never works. The overhook triangle, where Marlon Vera loves doing it. Carlos Condit used to do it back in the day. I was just watching his fight with Tyron Woodley and his one with Thiago Alves a couple of days ago, and he was doing it against Woodley. But when you got to throw it over your head, pretty difficult because you've got to extend your hips up into the triangle, and if the guy if the guy's so far over your head that you're having to go into the old Elton John suck your own dick stretch to do it, you're not putting yourself in a very strong position. And he was doing it like against the cage with his legs over his head, and he was holding the glove, and Herb Dean's like, stop holding the glove. And he's like, I didn't know I was holding the glove. And then for the rest of the fight, he just cried about fouls. He'd turn his back to a punch coming in to throw his arm over Yadong's shoulder from closed guard, and he'd go, he hit me in the back of the head. And he was talking to the ref, talking to everyone. The moment someone starts talking to the ref, you know that they're toast. It was the worst habit of Michael Bisping. Even when he was beating people, he'd be talking to the ref and getting distracted. Not just because it's a distraction, but also, obviously when he was pointing to his mouthpiece and got kneed in the face by Anderson Silva, that was him being literally distracted in the moment. But it also starts you building up this mental thing for why you're having trouble or why you're losing, or even why you can't put the guy away or whatever. You're building a narrative where the referee's against you and it's actually them that's at fault. When really, if you watch the best fighters, they'll have horrible calls put against them by the referee because it happens. You'll get some in your favor and you'll get some against you, and they just don't react. They don't give a shit. And afterwards, you can come out and say, like, oh, I think I lost because of this, and you can make your excuse, but you got to be able to ignore it in the fight. And Gutierrez was doing a terrible job of that. More importantly, do you think that complaining to the ref is going to make the ref change their behaviour? It's not that one game with Michael Jordan where the ref's like, I didn't see it, Michael, but I believe you. No, the referee's going to go like, fuck you, I'm right. And certainly, that you don't give the referee an option, because he can't now say, oh, you've brought that to my attention and now I'm going to start calling it, because then the opponent's going to get angry. And people are going to get mad about possible corruption, and you're going to have, well, you're never going to lose your job as a referee because there's so few of them, and you can basically do whatever you want. But nobody wants to bring that heat by suddenly changing what they're calling or what they're counting as fouls because one fighter told them. In boxing, traditionally in boxing, the coach says, don't say a word. I'll try and bring it to the referee's attention between rounds, because the referee walks to one corner and the other a lot of the time. Granted, the corners are still mic'd up in modern day boxing and MMA, so you would hear the coach saying, look, he's doing this. Can you please look out for it? But it's a better look for everyone involved, and it doesn't distract the fighter so much. I've referenced it before, but the McGregor-Habib fight, there was that edit people made afterwards that was like McGregor getting battered, and then he's like, oh, it's only business. But the it's only business or whatever it was line came after he had a pretty successful end to round 3 because he was cheating his arse off. He was holding Habib's glove and stuff, and then Habib gets mad and is like shouting at the referee, and McGregor's like, it's only business. It was more of a smuggy thing. But yeah, Habib, who's a consummate professional and very hyper-focused on winning at all costs, because the referee wasn't calling these fucking blatant fouls, allowed it to get in his head, and McGregor was more than happy to play to that. Didn't help him win, but it did piss off Habib for a little while. And was it the end of round 2? Because then round 3 is when he came out and actually put it on Habib and had a little bit of success. Anyway, not a fight you need to catch up on, if I'm honest. Gutierrez versus Song, that is. If you've not seen McGregor versus Habib before, I don't know where you've been. You're just getting started in MMA and you're like, where does this Habib guy come in? So yeah, no one is excited about that. No one will remember that fight in a week's time, I imagine. Khalil Rountree Jr. versus Anthony Smith. This one was what most people were looking forward to, and they expected Khalil Rountree to murder Anthony Smith, and I suppose he did. I expected him to fuck it up because Khalil Rountree loves winning, loves losing every second fight that he should win. But then Anthony Smith loves winning fights that he should lose. So it was kind of a crazy matchup. I'll be honest, I quite liked what Anthony Smith was doing in this one. Tried to back him up immediately, which if you told someone that beforehand, they'd have gone, nah, mate, couldn't back up Khalil Rountree. He's a massive hitter. Came out with the light lead leg. He was Lumpini ready, not Khalil Rountree. The main thing in this one was Khalil Rountree looking for that counter right hook, which he, I won't say debuted against Dorcas, but it looked a lot sharper against Dorcas. Talked about this on the Boycast, but if you watched his fight with Pragnio, he dropped Pragnio with a counter right hook as Pragnio came in, but it was a straight up and down right hook, whereas he's been doing this thing in his last, his last 2 is in this one and Chris Dorcas, where he dips off to the left side and then swings the right hook over the top. And he's added a nice slip to it that he times quite well. And you'll see him going jab and immediately slip off and throw the right hook. Did that about 3 times against Dorcas because Dorcas would throw the right straight back. Southpaw versus orthodox stuff. Rowntree's the southpaw. So he throws the jab. The other guy throws the right straight back or a 1-2. And he gets his head off to the outside of the right hand and throws his own right hook. And he did that loads against Smith here. And Smith got dinged a couple of times. And then a couple of times he did. So the third round's when he got murked. Second round, or maybe it was the beginning of the third round, he came out and he threw a right hand and he immediately ducked his head and hit Khalil Rountree's chest with his upper body and got a clinch, which was a lot like when Dustin came out against Conor McGregor the second time. Why am I referencing McGregor so much on this podcast? People are going to think that I'm like a massive McGregor fan, but it happened that it was an important fight and this happened in it. McGregor's move is to slide back and throw the left hand. So Dustin throws his left hand and shifts through, but he ducks the left hand of McGregor and goes into the clinch. And that was an immediate setup of the possibility of a takedown because he took McGregor down, and then McGregor's like, oh no, he's not just going to box me. And I have to be careful throwing that counter now. So Smith went under it in the second or third round, and that was a good move. But a lot of the time he was throwing his right straight and then pulling his head straight back, which is what Tyson Fury was doing against Ngannou, because Ngannou like religiously threw the left hook in return to everything that Tyson Fury landed. So a lot of the time it missed because Tyson Fury's 6'7" or whatever, and he pulls his head back and gets a couple of inches of clearance on that left hook. But it did land a few times, and obviously the one that dropped him is a great example because he was leaning back, but he came in too close. It's a tricky thing because how are you going to throw your right hand, which you want to commit on and punch through the opponent with, while also being far enough away that you can lean back and their big swing falls short? Smith did have success with that weird, when he does it from southpaw and orthodox, but he turns his shoulders all the way through when he's throwing his rear hand, or before he throws his rear hand, and he throws his rear hand so long and reaching that it's basically a jab. It doesn't have a lot of power on it, but he flicks people on the end of his reach, and he landed that a couple of times. Khalil was looking for the big right hook of everything. I did like Khalil's kicking in this one. Obviously, he's in love with Muay Thai, but if you notice the couple of really good body kicks he lands in this one, he was having trouble because he was on the back foot and he wasn't really comfortable throwing first from there. And certainly kicking off the back foot is difficult because if the guy's constantly stepping in on you, if you mistime it, he's stepping up the middle of your kick and he's punching you while you're on one leg, which nobody wants, or bundling you over into a takedown. So what Roundtree did on the two occasions that he threw his kick really well, his round kick to the body, was he faked as if he was going to come out swinging or come back swinging. Anthony Smith took a step back, and then as Anthony Smith started walking back in, going, okay, it was a fake, and started coming back in, that's when Roundtree threw the kick. It's real subtle, but if you can play with that timing on like any technique you do, feint, they move, as they recover, you throw for real with something else or the same thing. It's a really powerful weapon in your toolbox. Arsenal? Tool in your toolbox, weapon in your arsenal. There you go. I always enjoy watching Roundtree's clinch work because he's so obsessed with the Thai style of striking in the clinch, and obviously there's so little effective striking in the clinch. It's a huge blind spot in MMA that exists because wrestlers don't really want to strike from the clinch that much, and strikers don't want to be in the clinch that much. So when you see someone doing good striking from the clinch, like a Chidi Njokwani or someone like that, it really stands out. Roundtree's head post, again, we talked about how he was almost choking Chris Daukaus with his head into the neck, his top of his head into Daukaus' neck under the jaw, and then his hands locked on the other side of the head. And Daukaus was squirming like, uh-oh, better get that off my neck. But that's a great position to start kneeing from. But this one, he kept getting he'd have the underhook or the overhook on one side, and he'd be fighting on the bicep tie on the other. And as Anthony Smith either cleared that, or there was one where he was using the hand on the throat to try and make space, but he'd just try and push that hand into the center and then fold the elbow over. And he came close with two really good elbows from two different breaks of the clinch when that happened. There was a moment in round 2 near the end where Anthony Smith, because he'd been sort of crowding him cautiously, but Anthony Smith starts like reaching out and tapping his hands, doing Kali or Wing Chun, but he's tapping his hands and he's like parrying them, and he's faking punches at the same time, and it really throws Roundtree. And Anthony Smith's able to get off like a 1-2, and Roundtree's not able to really counter. And that was really interesting. It showed that the sort of pressuring him and flustering him thing is legitimate. His plan is to like bang you with a big counter, but if you throw so much static out there, scramble the airwaves and whatnot, it makes it very hard for him. But I think Khalil's read on the uppercut in round 3 was really nice because Anthony Smith does a lot of that very high forearms, the triangle guard they used to say with Manny Pacquiao, very high elbows and forearms, head down, head crunched over, so that the uppercut has a target. If someone's standing upright, the uppercut's really hard to land. You can catch, that's when you see the weird ones like BJ Penn catching the end of GSP's nose and ripping it upwards. You could get a horrible cut out of that, but it's a very small target area. Uppercuts are for when people's head is forward of their hips. And when guys cover up by crunching their head, rolling their head down into their chest, their chin onto their chest, and their guard high, the uppercut is a real game changer there. So Khalil throws the left straight and then the right uppercut, loads it up, knocks Smith's head back. Smith falls to the mat, rolls over. And, everyone saw this, and it was ice cold that Khalil Roundtree raised his hand up like he was going to do a hammer fist and never did it. But, I joked about this before the fight. I was like, Anthony Smith's going to, he gets knocked about a lot, and then he goes to the turtle. I could see him getting the DQ here because Khalil loves kicking the body on the ground and throwing knees when guys are just coming up off one hand. So I think Khalil Rountree did himself a real favor. I mean, I'm always talking about this with walk-away KOs anyway, because there is definitely the possibility that Khalil Rountree jumps on top of Anthony Smith, doesn't land a good shot because he's busy like turtling or whatever, and then is forced to continue, and the fight goes on. The walk-away knockout's genius because, like, yeah, when Mark Hunt flatlined people, that was impressive. But a lot of the time, people aren't just dead on the floor. You go, oh, I'd totally have him there. And the ref, knowing your reputation, will be like, no, don't, you'll kill him. I'm sure people will get weird about that, but people survive some horrendous beatings you don't expect them to in MMA if the fight is allowed to continue. I think of Benoit Saint-Denis versus Zaleski, but Brock Lesnar versus Shane Carwin. Carwin knocked him down. Carwin was like the Francis Ngannou of the time. He was the biggest hitter in MMA. Knocked down Brock Lesnar. The ref said, keep going, to the point that people thought that like the fix was in. And Carwin gassed out, trying to beat on, well, actually effectively beating on a stunned Brock Lesnar. But, Anthony Smith was under Glover Teixeira getting wailed on for 5 rounds, and Jason Herzog failed to stop it. The corner failed to stop it, but he did, quote unquote, survive to the decision. But I'm just very happy that Khalil Rountree is actually moving forward with his career. I think his clinch stuff looked strong, which has always been a big letdown, and the gas tank looked great, because what I talked about on the Boycast was like, this is another one where he's a guy who's known for slowing down, but you have to push him. Because, actually, though, Pragneo was a fight where he just sort of shadow boxed and got gassed. But, Alexijuk is a great example. Khalil Rountree came out a million miles an hour, looked phenomenal. Alexijuk takes it, and then just keeps going, come on, hit me a bit more. And every time Khalil Rountree takes a break, he hits him in the liver with his wicked left hook, southpaw wide left to the body. And, just took it all out of him. But we were talking about, like, there are so many guys who get a reputation for gassing, and then their opponent comes in and doesn't make them work. They're like, I just have to wait till round 3. And you're like, if he hasn't had to work for the full 2 rounds up to this point, he's not going to be tired. But this one, Anthony Smith was in his face from the get-go, throwing strikes. Khalil Rountree was looking for counters and having to deal with the pressure and having to deal with the threat of the takedown and stuff. And he didn't get tired. So it was actually really impressive, because I was so ready to be down on Khalil here. And I think it was just about the best he could have shown here. I think if he'd knocked Smith out in the first round with like the first strike, I wouldn't have been that impressed. I'm actually more impressed that I saw him deal with some of the stuff he's had trouble with, and for a longer period. And Anthony Smith, I get sick of Anthony Smith main events. I get sick of Anthony Smith quotes getting put all over websites because he has a podcast and he wears those big nerd glasses. Someone said he's deceptively stupid, because he wears nice clothes and those big glasses, and he's well-spoken. People think he's smarter than he is. But, he's always saying things like John Jones, actually not that much better than me skill-wise. But I thought he put in a good performance here. He's a guy with only a few real skills, and he managed to leverage them in a pretty effective game plan. Got met with the big power. And it was a specific look that Khalil Rountree picked up on in Smith that got him caught here. The stuff that he was doing was working. God, that was awfully positive about a light heavyweight fight. Well, I am under the weather, as you can probably tell from my voice. I have a little bit of a cold. Maybe I'm delirious. Other stuff on this card. Nasrat Haqparast murked Jamie Malarkey very quickly. I will say, little bit of improvement in Nasrat Haqparast. I really like how he wasn't throwing his upper body miles forward of his lower body when he threw his left hand. He had this overhand, and this left straight actually, that he banked so much on, and then had to bank so much on because he threw it in a way where he couldn't throw his right hand afterwards. I'm sure I put up tweets of this before, but like a load of stills of him just, his shoulders he's basically bent in half doing a good morning at the end of his left hand. And it makes it impossible to follow with a decent right hand. He was looking more contained, throwing just sort of like the left straight to the body, the left straight to the head. And then he goes double jab, left hand, stays on top of his, keeps his shoulders over his hips, and then throws a right kick to the body. Jamie Malarkey's like, circles around a little bit, but Nasrat's still on top of him, and then he throws the left straight and knocks him out. Fantastic. Part of it was the double jab to get close enough, because Jamie Malarkey was like, he's throwing nonsense at me, and let him stand too close for how threatening he is with the left hand. And part of it was that he threw a nice combination with a body kick on the end of it, but it was mainly just like staying on top of his feet. It's called throwing a punch, and certainly in lower weight classes, you do have to put your body weight into a punch to get more power on it. In the upper weight classes, guys can throw arm punches and still knock each other out. just on the weight of their limbs and their their muscles. In the lower weight classes, you got to be able to throw your weight behind blows. And sometimes you have to make like technical sacrifices for that. So Prince Nazim Hamed's a great example of a boxer who was very, very small, but had one punch knockout power. And a lot of it was because he leapt into his fucking punches. But he tended, certainly earlier in his career, not so much at the end, not so much like Augie Sanchez fight time, but he tended to be very good at either hiding when he was going to throw a big punch between the boxing. And by boxing, I mean like normal jabbing, crossing, hooking, and then getting a big swing in there, or tying up off a big punch, a big leap, the leaping lead hand uppercut, the big overhand he threw that looked like a straight and then came over the top. You've got to have weight transfer. And this happens to people subconsciously when they throw a punch, they throw they're throwing the punch forwards. So everything goes forwards. And you end up bent over at the waist and looking ridiculous and then unable to chase the guy. Even if you did hit him and hurt him, you've then got to like recover your posture and then start running at him. Makes it very easy when people circle past your lead leg. If you're a southpaw like Hakparast, every time you throw your left hand, they circle past your lead leg. You're never going to catch up with them. So seeing him get a bit more control of that is really good. Tim Elliott versus Sumadeji. This is another sad one because Sumadeji's lost quite a few now, but he does look really interesting, to be such a long, tall boy in that weight class and have some nice counters. So he was looking, when he was southpaw and Elliott was, he stayed southpaw. When Elliott was orthodox, he was doing well drifting off to the open side and throwing the left hand as a counter. When Elliott went southpaw, he was looking for the lead right hook to the body. There was a beautiful one where Elliott went southpaw and he went right hook to the body, left straight to the head, and then 1, 2, 3 alternate hands after that. Love that. Beautiful stuff. And you saw that again, like Elliott, good entries on singles, but you saw that, I've said this before, the tree topper or any takedown where you have to raise someone's leg as high as possible. Much lower success rate in the lower weight classes, where everyone's flexible, good at jumping around on one leg. If you watch Jiri versus Glover grabs the single leg, does a little run the pipe fake where he threatens to dump the guy on his bum, Jiri on his bum, and then he picks the leg up and puts it as high as possible onto his shoulder. And then he runs and Jiri falls over. Then you watch Matuj Gamrot, who's one of his favourite finishes to the single is to raise the leg as high as possible and run at the guy. And against Arman Sarukian, against Rafael Fiziev, he picks the leg up, gets it on his shoulder, runs at the opponent, and then they hop back fast enough that their leg comes off his shoulder. Or he gets them to the fence and the leg comes off the shoulder. It's an odd finish because what you're really getting is like a scramble or a back exposure a lot of the time. And as we'll say, like finishing a single is either you get both legs, you consolidate it as like a double leg by getting control of both legs somehow, or you get the legs as far apart as possible and have them fall over by raising the leg high. So Sumadeji slipped out of the first one, but Elliott immediately elbowed him in the face, which I thought was really cool. And then he did the same thing again and got the run the pipe for the finish. And I've always been saying, like, running the pipe, not very common finish in high-level grappling or MMA, and then he's 2 on this card. And you got Markoon doing it in every single fight. Off the fence, granted. Guard passing was nice. He did kind of an old-school one when Sumadeji opened his legs and scissored them to try and get up onto an arm and stand up. Elliott reached over the top leg and grabbed the bottom foot. So they had him sort of trussed up with one hand and then circled round. There was some really lovely cradle work here. Neil Melanson's done a lot of stuff on the cradle. He put out a whole DVD on the cradle. And he has sort of a reputation where people are like, some of these submissions are bullshit. they're gym taps or they're old catch wrestling shit that doesn't really work. But he does a thing called the bunch. He gets the cradle, which is a horrible position because you just get tired. You're basically... it's very hard to break someone's grip when they've got you cradled, and you're going to spend a load of energy if you start trying to like straighten out your back, try and deadlift out of it when you're crumpled up. But Melanson does this thing called the bunch where he then circles back and steps over the opponent's legs and crunches them up by having the grip over the head and sitting on their legs. And then he can look for an arm triangle off there, and he was working with Chael Sonnen when Chael Sonnen did that to Brian Stan back in the day. Legendary commentator, always going to get a shout out on this podcast for being great at fucking doing research and knowing what he's talking about on the broadcast. But yeah, it was really interesting because he got this cradle and then he was sort of sat on the leg and started elbowing the body. And Sumadeji's elbows were tight. And then the moment Sumadeji was like, oh, I'm getting out of this and started pushing away, his elbow popped out and went over Elliot's shoulder, and Elliot went, I'm having the arm triangle. And he just took it and flattened him out and actually choked him unconscious. But there's a lot of interesting stuff there in the cradle that people are discovering more nowadays. It was a bit rarer back in the day, but like it's always been valuable as a guard pass from half guard to cradle the guy's top leg and head. It's always been huge in wrestling because like the real tricky pinners are always people who focus on the cradle because you can catch it from almost anywhere. I think it was Ben Askren. Oh no, it might have been Wade Shellers said, you can be much worse than someone, but if you grab if there is a moment when you can grab a cradle because of the nature of the pin, it's instant finish of the match. It's the knockout of wrestling, basically. And you can beat someone much better than you in an instant where the rest of the match they could be kicking your ass. But because it's such a helpless position to be in a cradle, people are just trying to work out ways that they can get submissions out of it. It's quite tricky. The Danaher Death Squad loved using the cradle to tilt people over from Turtle and then enter the legs, but you're sort of giving up top position to do that. Roger Gracie used to love using the cradle to pass, half guard. I've always liked sitting on the top leg and then trying to punch through a darce, but it's a bit tricky. Again, if they keep their elbows tight, it's very tricky. That's always going to be a problem, them keeping their elbows on the inside. So Elliot using elbow strikes to the body to make Sumidaiji open his elbows seemed like a big deal in this one. Muniz versus Park was pain because Muniz was hitting good takedowns, getting good top position, taking the back, and then doing nothing. There's a goddamn epidemic of talented grapplers refusing to strike. It's Muniz, it's Jailton Almeida, it's Muhammad Makayev. Guys getting really good positions and then being absolutely terrified to just unlock their hands and throw a punch or an elbow. I get that guys are going to keep trying to jump up. Park was actually really good here, constantly getting up to his knees, constantly trying to mule kick a leg back so that the hooks came out and he could start building. He was looking for switches and things. But it was made even worse by the fact that Muniz wants to get on someone's back and then he wants to fall off and get the armbar. And guys aren't giving him the armbar anymore. He's trying to force this armbar. And then he just falls off into bottom position. And so what happens is that the Iron Turtle gets 3 good elbows in at the end of the round from top position. And you're going, well, yeah, damage. Park should win this. There was a glorious sweep in round 1 where Andre Muniz attempted a takedown, got sprawled on, sat, and as Park ran round behind him, he sat to half guard and just rolled him over. Really beautiful. But, this is me being like, cool grappling, bruh. Judges should not be. Judges should be like, here's what the criteria is. Oh, damage. It was a split decision, but Andre Muniz, man, it's basically, it's that he's got one trick and it got worked out. That's it. He's got one finish and that's what people have worked out. He's going to try and either like get on your back and then swing out to the armbar, or he's going to get on your back and as you stand up, he's going to reach for your leg to do they used to call it the Suluev stretch, but it's now the Cisneros stretch because he did it to actual world-class guys in ADCC. But yeah, where you reach down for their leg and you try and extend it, and then he'd go over their back. But now he just gets on people's backs and they go, I'm keeping my elbows in, thanks. At which point he should be like, cool, I'm coming up on top and I'm punching your face. Watch Tatsuro Tairo in his fight on this card. He's on the guy's back. He goes, no, fuck it, I want to be on top. And he just takes one hook out, brings it under their bum, and gets on an elbow and builds up. And yeah, he ends up in like half guard on top, which isn't as good as the back from a classical jiu-jitsu perspective. But if you're on someone's back and underneath them, you can't elbow them. If you're on top in half guard, you can elbow them. So yeah, that was a really hard fight to watch. I mean, I still kind of enjoyed it because there were cool moments in it, but it's just, I was watching it going, people aren't going to like this, and Muniz is going to get the wrong message if he gets the win. Giuseppe versus Song was, it sort of fell into the same rhythm over and over again, but Giuseppe's interesting because he's got cool judo, and then he went to the city kickboxing, and he's got some nice feints out there now. He's got a nice step up inside low kick, big thing for them. He's got a cool jab where he holds his hand vertical like he's giving a thumbs up and then goes from in front of his chest. This was, I'm talking about Roberto Duran an awful lot at the moment because I'm watching all of Duran's fights, but constantly the theme I come back to with Duran is that he's not the best jabber in the world, but he will jab with someone to establish this rhythm where it's like, I jab, you jab, or I jab and you counter. So I jab and then I move my head, and then we see where we are. You throw your jab and immediately move your head, and there's a good chance that the opponent's moved back at you and you've opened up a counter there. But then there's also this thing where he jabs and then the opponent jabs back. He jabs, the opponent jabs back. And then once he's got that rhythm, it only takes him one to spot the rhythm. So he goes jab, the opponent jabs back. And then the next time he jabs, he knows the opponent's going to jab back. So he counters. And then because his game is built around power punches and infighting more than it is jabbing, that's how he uses his jab to open up those opportunities. Song was trying to do the power punching here. He wanted to land left hooks and right straights on the chin, but he was getting skewered with the jab. But he wasn't really throwing his own jab. He should have been throwing the jab. I mean, he's not... Duran had to be able to deal with people's jabs in boxing and jab with them because it's boxing. In MMA, you don't actually have to. He could be working on just the low kicks. I mean, they did fucking commentary being like, we're actually going to set a record in this fight. It's top 10 low kicks landed welterweight all time. And you're like, that's not a record. That's not even really interesting, to be honest. Top 10 welterweight low kicks landed of all time. Cool. Hyun Sung Park versus Shannon Ross. I mean, on the Boycast I was talking about this. I was saying Shannon Ross been knocked out violently 3 times, lost on the Contender Series and was brought in at short notice. He is sort of like a poster boy for how the modern UFC works. But I was saying, I'm not saying this to be mean. 2 of those knockout losses came from big loaded up rear hand swings that he just didn't see. He didn't react to them. And they were really quite blatant. And I was saying, like, fighters should call it a day when their reactions are not what they were. I always think of, I think it was Mike Wigglejohn was talking about, like, getting hit by punches that he knew he shouldn't, and then said, okay, right, that's time for me. I'm done. I think Bill Wallace said the same thing too, but it's quite a common theme. Shannon Ross is getting hit by punches that he should not. And throughout this fight as well, you could see Park would throw a shoulder feint, but close enough that if he'd thrown it, he could have hit Ross. And Ross would react like 2 beats too late. And Ross would do all right when he was on offense because I think that's what he is. He's like, I'm going to throw an interesting combination. I'm going to throw a Superman jab into a low kick. I'm going to throw a Superman punch into a left hook. When he was doing his own thing, he was all right. It was like he was working on the bag. Whereas a fight is a relationship between 2 people. It's you've got to be reacting and reading the opponent. And he was completely lost with that. Moment of the night was Laura Sanko accidentally saying it's a bit worrisome that he's been knocked out 3 times in rapid succession. Because anyone who has followed this has been like, why is he fighting again so soon after just getting sparked? And why is he still here after getting sparked 3 times in quick succession? The answer to that is obviously, well, he needs money and the UFC need people on their cards. But someone in his life should have said, take a break. Because the moment she's saying this, he gets hit with a jab and it drops him and sends him into a forward roll. And it's not a big jab. It's a jab. So gorgeous body shot and follow up for the finish. But man, yeah, Ross, I mean, I think he does consider himself a striker, but he's got to find some way of making his game more grindy because I don't think his reactions are coming back. Melky Costa versus Steve Garcia was dull until it wasn't. He spent the whole round trying to mat return him. Second round, Garcia gets on his back, starts choking him, seems to choke him mostly unconscious because he then lets go and elbows him 2 times and Costa was not reacting. And then that was Tyra beat Carlos Hernandez by a naked right-hand lead, which was not particularly fast. I think he just set up the threat of the takedown so much that Hernandez wasn't really paying attention to, or was so concerned about it that he missed the the slower punch there. Against a really good striker in a striking match, I wouldn't expect that to work, but because he'd spent the whole first round on the bottom, there was a really nice deep half entry in this one actually, where Tyra went underneath him and came out the back door. Loved that. But yeah, that's about it for this fight. I didn't do a breakdown because I thought these weren't that good. Certainly the main event wasn't particularly interesting. I don't think anyone would be clamoring to read about how Chris Gutierrez didn't throw his usual low kicks. So I'm going to write something later in the week about UFC 296, which is coming up. Lots of interesting people on there. You tell me who you'd most like to read about. I've done a big piece on Pantoja, so I might just unlock that this week for everyone. But for for the Patreon boys, I'd like to write something separate. We could talk. I don't think I've ever done a big article on Leon Edwards. Shavkat, obviously a very interesting one. But I know people are also clamouring to hear about Martin Boudet or the highly anticipated return to competition of Irina Aldana following her loss to Amanda Nunes 6 months ago. She's coming back to fight some lass on the prelims. But yeah, if you want to get in on the extra stuff, the boycast, the articles, extra slack in your life, sign up to the Patreon, be a boy. If you want to send an email to the podcast, jackslackpodcast@gmail.com. And if you want to see what I'm writing anytime, fightprimer.com. I'm your boy Jack Slack. Skipping the 2 women's matches and knowing that I missed nothing, bless.